Welcome to the Backyard Professor videos. Hey, I'm going to do a couple of things this year in my videos on the Book of Mormon. And I'm truly serious. I'm going to destroy two assumptions that some of us may or may not have. I'm going to be a destroyer of assumptions. I'm going to destroy your assumption that the scriptures are boring. Because they're not. The scriptures are really quite fun. It's very interesting to really sink your teeth into something significant and profound in history as it involves the scriptures, or in the scriptures as that involves history, etc. The second assumption that I'm just determined to destroy is that we are not smart enough to study the scholarly materials dealing with the scriptures. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Look, if I can read the scholars and the intellectuals and the philosophers and find some profound, interesting insights and meanings to help build my faith in the scriptures, then you can. And that's how it is. So anyway, let me get on with this video. I have just recently read a fabulous little history book by Alan Nevins, The Gateway to History. This is a great little book. It's a double-day anchor book. I believe it was published way back in 1938, and then the revised edition was 1962. Yeah, 1938 and then 1962, the revised edition. He has some things on the historians that I want to read to you. Some ideas. This is on page 223. I got this in a used bookstore for, like, what, $1? Yeah, it's got well more than $1 worth of information. It's a great read, man. I couldn't put it down. Page 222. In dealing with all of the innumerable kinds of biased evidence, the student must discipline himself to a scientific attitude. And he explains what he means by this. To do this, he must not be merely on his guard against crass misstatements, obvious prejudices, and witnesses of the any stigma to beat a dogma school. I love how he words that. He must above all form an analytical frame of mind. He will be prepared to discard or discount all partial views of causation. On page 232, 10 pages later, I made my own index to this book. I always do. You know, when a good idea comes along, I make my own index on the inside of the covers, and then I can look up ideas on my own real easy, because most indexes in book aren't worth a spin. 232. The ability of the writer to ask himself the most important and revealing questions, and to ask them constantly, is indispensable to the attainment of reach or depth in his work. Now he's talking to people who want to become historians and writers. As the spirit of doubt, of scientific criticism, is the beginning of wisdom in historical study, nothing must be taken for granted, and everything needs to be subjected to strict rules of evidence. Yeah, would that the establishment Dead Sea Scrolls group operated that way, huh? Boy, that's a fiasco, isn't it? I just finished reading Norman Golb's book again. Who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls? Go read it. You'll see why you don't have to believe everything just because it's published, I'll tell you what. You need to gain a discriminating attitude, a discriminating mind. The way to penetrate beneath the pretty superficialities and come to grips with historical realities is to propound one incisive question after another. Ask questions of the text. Yes, investigate it with gusto and relish. Absolutely. Until the past ceases to look like a smooth record and becomes instead a rough and puzzling set of difficulties. Because that's how history works. On page 234, finally, and then I'll get to my topic. This is an introduction to my topic. The method of dealing with such problems in history involves distinct rules. These, broadly stated, are 3 rules. The writer must collect all the evidence that he can find. He must make sure that he has every pertinent fact available, not merely part of the pertinent facts. Okay? He must analyze the evidence to be fair, to be realistic. Use a critical discernment with your intelligence, reason, and logic. Examine all the evidence anew in the light that it offers and test it carefully. He should proceed until he feels or finds a hypothesis or a combination of several hypotheses which fits the facts and explains the historical result. The importance of assembling all of the pertinent facts upon a given situation is not often fully realized by the amateur student of history. How much easier it is just to pick out enough facts to prove a case. A vast deal of so-called history is indeed written in that fashion. It's always easier to write, it's usually easier to read, and open to only one objection: it generally misses the truth. By a one-sided choice of details, almost anything can be proven. I love that. Here is why I'm reading Nevins to you. Thomas J. Finlay, in the New Mormon Challenge, this was back, this is by Zondervan, this is by Francis Beckwith, Carl Mosser, and Paulo, and it was in 2002. He was describing the idea, his opposition to the Book of Mormon is that it doesn't really reflect an ancient Near Eastern origin. And the reason why is because it's obviously a 19th century production. Here's one of his ideas. He says, a parallel should be something beyond what Joseph Smith could have known from the King James Version or the Apocrypha. If we're going to find legitimate ancient Near Eastern parallels, they've got to be beyond the Bible. It might be objected that this assumes that Joseph Smith simply copied his material from the King James Version, rather than accepting at face value his own account of how the Book of Mormon came into existence, especially in light of various eyewitness testimonies. It's not my purpose here to examine the validity either of Joseph Smith's testimony or of the witnesses. However, I think the criteria I am suggesting is valid. The fact that the language of the Book of Mormon reflects the idiom of the King James Version is admitted by everyone. Pretty much, more or less, yeah. It's true that one would expect a translation of ancient material to occur in the idiom of the translator. But in this case, with the Book of Mormon slavishly using the King James idiom and translation and so on, in this case, the language of the King James Version is already ancient and archaic, even in the time of Joseph Smith. The expressions of the King James Version greatly influenced the religious language of the time, but the idiom permeates all of the portions of the Book of Mormon, whether in overtly religious genres such as prayers and visions, or in what are represented as historical narratives. It is at least a reasonable assumption for an outsider to Mormonism that the King James Version might have influenced the Book of Mormon. So we're back to this argument. That's his presentation, and he's trying to analyze it in a logical manner using some of the evidence that he had in front of him. Well, you have the Book of Mormon and you compare it with the King James Version, and sure enough, it's all throughout the Book of Mormon. Well, what do we make of that? In the Farms Review, Volume 15, Number 1 for 2003, John Twetness and Matt Roper discussed this principle of the almost ridiculously overuse of the King James idiom in the Book of Mormon. And it's real interesting, they note, because of Finlay's background in biblical studies. They note this on page 158, 159, and 160 in this review. I believe this is online also. Easy to get, very interesting to read. It is true, Finlay writes, that one would expect a translation of ancient material to occur in the idiom of the translator, but in this case the language of the King James Version was already archaic, even in the time of Joseph Smith. So you can see that they're using Finlay right. You know, everybody rants and raves that none of us Mormons know how to use our sources correctly. Well, I just read Finlay, and now I just read their use of Finlay, and they use him pretty good. However, the language found in the King James Version was already archaic in the time of King James. The King James Version was not a direct translation from the Hebrew and Greek texts of the Bible, however. Were you aware of that? This is real interesting. You see, Finlay did not bring all of the pertinent facts to the table, so Twetness and Roper do. Using their critical, analytical minds, yes, their scholarly analysis of the fuller historical situation, bringing in all the pertinent facts, they now are able to reason and explore the evidence in a much stronger manner. And I love this about these guys. They're very good. Some of my very favorite LDS scholars. And I know I say that about everybody I quote, but I'm not kidding. I love all these guys at the Neely Maxwell Institute, man. They're good. I know them all, too. They're fun. They're great people. The issue here, though, is that the King James was not a direct translation from the Greek and the Hebrew. It is a slightly modified version of the Bishop's Bible from 1569. Written instructions from the Archbishop of Canterbury to the members of the translation committee specified that they were to modify the wording of the bishop's Bible only when its wording did not agree with the meaning of the Hebrew Old Testament or Greek New Testament texts. The bishop's Bible was in turn a revision of the Great Bible, 1539, which was a revision of Taverner's Bible, 1539, which was a revision of Matthew's Bible, 1537, which was a revision of Coverdale's Bible, 1535, which was in turn based on the translation made by William Tyndale in 1526 to 1531. Tyndale relied in part on the translation prepared in the late 14th century by John Wycliffe, and he retained some of Wycliffe's wording. Fascinating, isn't it? Now, Finlay says it is highly likely that Joseph Smith was imitating the style of the King James rather than translating an ancient Hebrew original. Well, what about that claim? Well, listen to the actual logic and reason of this. I love how they answer this. This is fabulous. This is fun, isn't it? Why could he have not done both? And you know, when you think about it, you go, yeah. Why couldn't he have done both? Why must one always assume that the use of the King James style excludes his translating an ancient text? See, here's why they ask this question. They now begin to bring in very pertinent, valuable facts about translation. I love how they do this. This is really good. The King James Version, as those who study all this stuff know, it set the standard for scriptural language in Joseph Smith's day. Well, he seems to have used this style in his translation of the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses, and also in the revelations found in the Doctrine and Covenants. But Joseph Smith was not alone in following this practice. Interesting revelation just about to come up. Nearly a century after the publication of the Book of Mormon, Robert H. Charles prepared his magnum opus, a 2-volume translation of ancient texts known as the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha of the Old Testament. Charles made it a point to imitate the style of the King James Version of the Bible. He did so for several reasons. For example, the New Testament cited some of these works or earlier writings on which they were dependent because the King James Version was the Bible most commonly read in the English-speaking world. This ensured that whoever read R.H. Charles' materials would readily make the tie between the King James Version and those other texts. Oxford University Press continues to publish Charles' book. Now, not only him, but the Jewish scholar Theodore H. Gaster intermingled King James Version language and modern English in his translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, for those of you who are not aware, the Dead Sea Scrolls are an ancient Hebrew group of writings. And incidentally, I just read Norman Golb's book, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was a library. I don't think all of the scrolls originated with the Essenes at all. But these are ancient records in Hebrew. Some of them are in archaic Hebrew. Some of them are in Greek. There's no way they had the King James Version language. That wasn't to be for another 1,600 years. And yet Gaster translates his Dead Sea Scriptures into King James language. Isn't that interesting? When citing passages from the Dead Sea Scrolls that were also found in the Bible, he employed the older style of English. When Robert L. Lindsay began his work in Israel with the Gospel of Mark, he initially translated it into simple modern Hebrew from the Greek text. Okay? The text was then distributed to Hebrew-speaking readers and comments were invited. Many of those who reviewed the work expressed the desire that the Gospels, as ancient works, should be read in Old Testament Hebrew style, not the modern Hebrew. So Lindsay returned to the task and prepared a translation of Mark in biblical Hebrew that has received wide acclaim. It is possible that the Book of Mormon might have met with the same fate as Lindsay's modern Hebrew version of Mark had Joseph Smith rendered it into 19th century English. It would not have sounded scriptural to Americans and Englishmen acquainted with the King James Version of the Bible. Another reason for using the King James style in the Book of Mormon is that it makes it easier for the reader to recognize when the Nephite record itself were paraphrasing or quoting the biblical books. The language of the Book of Mormon fills the same role as R.H. Charles' translation of apocryphal and pseudepigraphic texts. Now, there's a lesson for us in this. On the one hand, we receive a criticism from a critic. And it's not necessarily a negative or antagonistic criticism. Now, some critics really do get nasty about this King James Version issue. But Finlay was just simply saying, look, is it too much to ask us as an outsider to see that Joseph Smith simply wrote the Book of Mormon and copied the King James Version? Yes, it is, based on the historical evidence. We have two very intelligent LDS scholars who use their intellects, who use their historical, critical analysis and inquiry tools, who assemble facts, evidence. They have doubt about the validity of the criticism. They have complete faith in the assembling of the pertinent facts necessary to intellectually and historically answer that objection. Now let me ask you something. Based on this very interesting evidence, I think very interesting evidence, and this response to a criticism about the Book of Mormon, is not your faith strengthened? Mine is. Isn't that interesting how that works? The mantle, when it hears this kind of an objection, if you were to ask someone who took the mantle side of things, they would simply bear their testimony to you. Well, don't worry about that kind of stuff. I testify the Book of Mormon is true. You can believe me. You can believe my testimony. The Book of Mormon is still true. Just read the Book of Mormon and follow its spirit. Well, that's fine and well, but what about my faith? What about the issue? The intellect comes along and it says, well, when we carefully analyze history, when we analyze the influence of the King James Version and its value as an expression of Scripture, and we notice that other scholars in other areas also utilize the King James Version language in their translation of ancient documents, just like Joseph Smith did, and yet they're certainly translating the ancient documents just like Joseph Smith did the Book of Mormon, we feel enlarged. We not only receive greater knowledge and the history of the transmission of the Bibles, but we also receive greater faith because of the addition of that intellectual knowledge. Yes? That's how it works. That's how it works. The mantle is not greater than the intellect. The intellect is what gives the mantle its reason for being. They're not either or. They're not in a dialectic dichotomy, meaning they're not in an argument over which one is correct. Which is the correct way to do this? No, it's a teamwork effort. The mind, the brain, the critical thinking, the exegetical analysis and sifting through evidence and finding the pertinent facts in helping us gain a greater understanding of knowledge of the Scriptures, of God, of Jesus Christ as the Savior, etc., of myriads of scriptural concepts, constructs, and ideas. The power of the intellect is that it uplifts us in two ways. We get two for one. One, our knowledge is increased. Light is brightened. And two, our faith grows. That's fun. What can I say? I'm telling you, when you analyze the Scriptures with your brain turned on, there's nothing like it, man. It's fun. It is fun. Now, was this video too difficult for you to comprehend? It really wasn't, was it? No, but I've given you some seriously good scholarly ideas from scholars' points of view about the Scriptures. And you liked it. Come on, admit it. Tell me in the comments below this video you liked it, didn't you? I sure did. When I found this, the first thing I thought of when I read through this is I thought, hey, man, I'm going to do a video. I'm going to show once again. There are tens of thousands of questions that you can ask about the Scriptures. Yes, because the questions is what generates you thinking through an issue instead of just blasé saying, oh yeah, I believe that, and I believe that. Oh yeah, I believe that. Oh, I believe that. I believe that. You know, to be 100% believing without any critical thought into this is as absolutely silly as being 100% doubtful about everything. There's a middle road, you know. The pendulum of 100% non-questioning belief is as dangerous and as worthless as the other side of the pendulum swing to be 100% doubting of everything. You can't function that way. There's got to be a give and take. There's got to be a balance. You know, it's like the Kabbalah tree of life. It's designed in those 3 pillars with the central middle pillar. It's like a scale of justice. There has to be a balance. So it is the ability for the Holy Ghost to bring ideas into our minds as we ask, as we try to strive to better ourselves and better our families and better our neighbors and friends and strangers, to live the good life of loving everyone. As that light, as those ideas, as that revelation strikes us, and we write them down. I have a tablet with me all the time. I'm constantly writing down my ideas. You write these down, and then you explore it. You look around a little. You buy a few books. You know, I've only got a couple of hundred. You begin to investigate, and it's fun. Besides, in the process of investigating, when you finally do come across the answer to your question, by the time you've gone through 50, 60, 70, 2, 3, 4, 500 books, you've also learned so much more about so many more subjects. You can write your research papers forever and non-stop. In fact, that's how I do these videos, you know. I have a screaming series of videos coming up I'm going to try to do this weekend, over New Year's, on the atoning Messiah in the Book of Mormon and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Great stuff. I've got to sift through about 50 or 60 sources first, though. But I think I'm about to the point where I can present a screaming set of videos for. I think it'll be 5 or 6 parts. I'm going to start gabbing and never be able to shut up. So this is my bias. This is my thesis. I firmly believe, in fact, I know, that when we use the God-given freedom to use the God-given intellect to explore, to learn, to discriminate, to discern, to apprehend, to comprehend, to enjoy, and have fun learning, the Scriptures come alive. It does not destroy faith. Intellect does not destroy faith. Ignorance does. Knowledge is power. Joseph Smith taught that. You have got to learn yourselves. Yeah. I'm going to show you throughout the course of this year on this Book of Mormon that it's fun. And it is very interesting. Oh, man, there is some new information just out on the Book of Mormon. That is delicious. I'm telling you. I wish I didn't have to sleep. That's becoming a bother, man. I could spend those 8 hours being productive making videos. Oh, that'd bore you stiff, wouldn't it? So anyway, that's my idea. As I explore more on the Book of Mormon, I promise I'll share just as absolutely much as I am physically capable of, because it's fun. It really is. So, thanks for watching my videos. And, as usual, I'll see you in the next video.